This is Canon Fodder, episode 46, live from Vietnam. My guest this week is Twitter personality and poster Mr. Lurker. How are we doing, sir?
Good, man. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. I was very excited to hear that you were a fellow Graham Greene fan, and an excited one. I posted in one of the group chats that we're both in. Anybody here a Graham Greene fan? And it seemed like you wanted to jump out of the screen and say, "Finally, finally we get to talk about Graham Greene." So I'm super excited to talk about The Quiet American. It's one of my favorite books. It's one of the best books I've ever read, and I'm excited to hear what you have to say about it.
Yeah, well, when you said that, like no one talks about Graham Greene on Twitter anymore. So I was like, hell yeah, dude.
And I've been slowly building the cause. And anytime that I try and recommend books to get people into fiction, Graham Greene is always at the top. Usually, The Quiet American, because it it's not his best work. I think Power and the Glory is probably his best work, but The Quiet American is equal parts literary and entertainment. Because the thing about Graham Greene, which you probably know, the listener does not, is that he, for a good portion of his career, he divided his works into entertainments, which are kind of his spy thriller or comedy novels, and his Catholic works, which are works that are usually dealing with more serious topics, more literary topics. And then after a while, honestly, they kind of blended together because he was a pretty talented writer. This I think would probably fall under his entertainments. It's not a particularly religious novel. It's very Cold War. It's very spy heavy, as we'll kind of get into. But that doesn't mean that it's schlock. It's deals with some very heavy topics. It deals with some very prescient issues, especially in our sort of post 9/11 world. And yeah, I want to hear your thoughts on the book. I want to know what you think it means, and the floor is yours, sir.
Okay, yeah, for sure. No, so yeah, like you said, he divided his work between the Catholic stuff and the entertainment, and then he said, screw it, like put them together. And yeah, this isn't a particularly religious book, but there's some interesting dialogue about God and about religion, and certainly there's some Catholicism in there too. So, um, and I think that flavor kind of brings it out. It like makes it a little bit more than just say a spy novel or like a Cold War kind of like historical fiction. I think there's a couple of scenes in particular that just kind of like, I don't know. For me, they elevate it beyond those kind of labels. I don't know what you think about
Oh, most definitely. And so to set the stage a little bit for the novel, it takes place 1950s Vietnam. The French are still in control, but they are slowly losing ground to the communist forces, the of Mao, not Mao Zedong, of Ho Chi Minh, right?
that.
Our main character, Thomas Fowler, he is a British journalist who has lived most of his life in the East. He is of this older aristocratic stock in the end of the British Empire. So, at the height of the British Empire, tons of well-educated aristocratic men are sent to go run the empire. That was the whole reason for the university system in England, was so that these aristocratic second sons, second, third sons, kind of black sheep almost, would go off and still be able to contribute to the empire, right? Uh, you could say that that's really the whole story of British colonialism, is sending top men all around the world, whether it's to get
Yeah.
rich in the Americas or whether it is to run Her Majesty's government in her various territories. Uh, Schools like Oxford schools, even what do they call them? Public schools like Eton and the boys' schools. Rugby, I think, is one too. Their whole purpose, their whole reason for being is to train young men to run the empire. And Thomas Fowler is one such man.
Yeah, and he's sorry to cut you off, but he is a pretty naked stand-in for Graham Greene.
Most
Like,
definitely. And it's funny too, because you mentioned before that this book still has some very Catholic elements, and I don't disagree. But it's funny that Graham Greene, the Catholic, writes, and he called himself like a Catholic agnostic, right? But
yeah,
uh, he writes atheist Thomas Fowler, and he does a good job, I would say, of writing this atheist character who is still he's still surrounded by Christianity. Christianity still informs his worldview, right? So even though he doesn't believe in God, he still has to see the world as though he did, because that was the culture he was raised in.
right, yeah.
Our other character is an American diplomat, kind of a he's honestly just such a putz. His name is Alden Pyle, and he represents the new kind of colonialism that is hitting the world stage, the American style of colonialism. It is moralistic. It is in some ways it's vitalistic, right? He definitely believes in what he's doing, and he believes that he can affect change. But it's so this book got a lot of criticism in 1955 when it came out for being too anti-American,
Yeah, yeah.
because Alden Pyle is described as, or yeah, Fowler doesn't think much of Pyle. He thinks that he's brash, braggadocious. He thinks that he's also kind of stupid. Alden Pyle is a complete theory cell. He really believes in this one who's the writer that he like lives and dies by. What's his name?
Good old York Harding.
Yes, yes. This man's theory of international relations informs Pyle's worldview to the point that he's trying to turn the people of Vietnam into Americans. Again, this is 1955. The book is written. The Vietnam War hasn't kicked off in earnest, and yet we are seeing the mistakes of the 20th century late 20th century, early 21st century American foreign policy in this book.
Yeah, no, oh man, Pyle, he's up to no good. But the funny thing is, so obviously we're informed about Pyle from Fowler's point of view,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not a good impression that we get of him.
No,
But
definitely not.
but the crazy thing is, Fowler is the only one in the book who cares about Pyle. Like, he has this. They have like this weird friendship going on, and uh, numerous times, like Fowler shows him real affection. I guess it's Fowler and Pyle's dog that are the only ones that care about him. But yeah, it's just. And
Well,
I
there's
don't know
the
if that's.
girl,
Yeah, I don't know if
and
that's like a allegory, because this is a very allegorical book. But I don't know if Greene was trying to say anything between that relationship, where like the British guy hates Pyle, but is the only one that actually cares for him. So
that's interesting, because you're not wrong. There is this sort of familiarity, almost a begrudging sense of responsibility that Fowler has for the young Pyle, right? And that's paid back in turn as well. We're gonna get into spoilers, we always do. Uh, there's at one point Pyle actually saves Fowler's life. Fowler is annoyed that he sort of owes Pyle anything, and also Pyle is an agent of the American state. He's a CIA spy, and his mission is to sew up an American style revolution in Vietnam. Have you ever seen Full Metal Jacket?
oh, have I ever? Yeah.
There's one. Is it Full Metal Jacket where the colonel says inside every Vietnamese is an American trying to crawl out, or is that from something else?
It's been a couple of years since I've seen that, so I couldn't tell you directly.
But you know
But
the line.
Yes.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it was a real line or if it was just something that was made up for a movie. But this is Pyle's worldview completely. Is that anybody can be an American with proper training, with enough theory selling, and with enough American money, and freedom and democracy can live anywhere. Fowler, he believes the exact opposite. Actually, he's representative of the late British Empire, who one doesn't have confidence in itself. Right? It post war England has no confidence in its ability to rule the world. It's basically thrusted that responsibility or that mission onto the United States. They don't even believe that the British way of life is worth exporting to the rest of the world at this point. They're tired, they're old, and they just want they want to quietly die. Maybe not explicitly, but definitely I'd say it's definitely there, especially in that second Churchill government, right?
Oh, for sure. And we run into a lot of French colonialist characters here too, and they're very much the same way. They are every single one of them is described as like weary and tired, and
Yes.
like they just want to die or go home or whatever.
Yes, and it's funny too because at the same time, Fowler has lived so long overseas. He's estranged from his wife, who won't give him a divorce, right? Because he is desperately in love with this 20 like 18 to 20-year old Vietnamese woman named Fong. Uh, all he wants to do is smoke opium and make love to this young woman and otherwise just kind of die. He can't make her a proper lady because his wife won't grant him a divorce, so he can't bring her home from Vietnam to England with him. So he's stuck in this limbo, right? Just kind of hoping to be dead. And if that's not an allegory for the British Empire, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you, folks. Yeah, there's something really powerful about that. I did an episode on Conrad's Heart of Darkness way back, like probably one of my earliest episodes of this pod. There's only 46, but yeah, so we're coming up almost a year, and I brought up this book as well as two different stages of empire. Right, you have
Mm.
all of these men who have lived so far from their native home for so long that they would not be able to live in their homeland. They're too different for their service to the empire overseas. We see very similar traits in Watson in the Sherlock Holmes stories, right? He's very much estranged from England in some ways because of his service in Afghanistan. We see this in countless other colonial works as well. And the closest that we have to an American version of this is the Western, is the cowboy mythos, right? He is out on the frontier. He becomes more like the Indians that he meets on the plain than the people who are back east living in civilization.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought up Conrad because obviously Conrad was a huge influence on Graham Greene, and so several of his Greene's books remind me very much of Conrad Conrad books, especially this and Our Man in Havana.
Mm.
Um, just like like the bumbling spy narrative, uh, the colonials of empires that are like on their dying legs, just kind of waiting out till the end, on the far side of the world. Like there's a lot of similarities. And the guy who did the introduction to my edition of Quiet American actually said this was a better plot than anything Conrad did,
Oh,
which
that's
I don't
interesting.
know. I don't know if I agree with that.
Yeah, that's
Um,
that's that's a tough sell, I'd say. I mean,
yeah.
Conrad's body of work is just much larger. I believe. Like I know not Con. I know Greene wrote at least almost 20 novels, I think.
Yeah, and
and
like a
and and
million nonfiction works too.
and a ton of short stories. But Conrad, his body of work is just massive. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, but there are like reading this after reading like Heart of Darkness, as you said, or like Lord Jim, or um, like Youth, or some of those other kind of Southeast Asian tropical colonial stories. Like you really get that that Conrad flavor from Green, which
Oh,
hey, I'm
definitely.
glad he picked up.
Yeah, I mean, you and another writer that you could probably throw in the mix too is Orwell,
Oh, sure,
especially
yeah,
especially his not that's I keep wanting to say Dharma Bums, but that's Kerouac.
yeah,
Uh, well, there's the shooting the elephant, right?
yes.
That's his most famous sort of anti-colonial work. What's the one book about being a cop in British India?
Ooh, I don't know.
Anyway, anybody listening out there, if you want to comment and tell me I'm an idiot, I'd appreciate it. Anyway, yeah, there's something about all of these colonial men. If Churchill had a bit of this too, because he grew up the son of a diplomat. You know, uh, he fought in the Boer War.
Oh yeah.
You know, he had this. In fact, I would say that it informed him. He had to be extra patriotic, extra British because he grew up overseas.
Yeah, it may have that whole period may have informed his policies a little too much, as I'm sure many of us will agree on.
Yeah, yeah. Neither here nor there. So back to the novel, right? Pyle is everything that Fowler is not. He is young. He is idealistic. He is unmarried, right? He also falls for Fong, right? But
Hmm.
unlike Fowler, he can actually make an honest woman of her. He can marry her, which is attractive to her, obviously, because she doesn't like to just be some old man side piece, right? And there's a dark side to Pyle. He's running weapons to this third sort of way army in Vietnam, not aligned with the government, not aligned with the communists, right? This secret third thing, right? He is involved in terrorist plots. In fact, when the reason that Fowler's life is in danger in the first place is because Pyle has set up a bombing, or has set up the situation for these terrorists to do a bombing. And probably the most interesting part of the book is when that occurs. Pyle doesn't care about the innocents who are killed in it. He's worried about the blood on his shoes. He says, I have to go get my shoes cleaned. And he just automatically he writes off casualties in war are necessary, but we are doing good work here, so anything to further that goal is necessary, which is exactly the same thing you would hear from a communist.
Right.
That is the exact justification for dekulakization or the great leap forward in China. So not only is Green here saying that the Americans, their moralizing is going to get a lot of people killed, but the whole point of their moralizing is to combat something that is moralizing just on a different side. Say what you want about colonialism, but they left you alone, more or less.
Yeah, no, that's honestly that scene like after the bicycle bomb goes off. Or maybe I don't think it's clear. Anyways, when Pyle and Fowler are standing there, Pyle literally says, "Oh, they died for democracy,"
Yeah,
and you
yeah,
know, we'll write them a check or something. You know, the victim will write the families a check.
yeah. It's just it. I cannot stress enough, because again, this book comes out in 1955, 10 years after the liberation of Europe, right? 10 years after uh, America has cemented itself as the one of two world superpowers, right? This English Catholic writer is shitting all over Americans, and people are so mad at him, but he is ultimately borne out, and he's found correct. It's really prescient stuff, and it only took like 6 years for people to find out. Oh, it's like oh, America is everything that this guy says that they are.
Yeah, it's funny because he is very prescient, but I like his portrayal of Americans. You know, this was obviously written in the 50s, and then like all the all the Vietnam related media, especially the movies to come, like Americans here are just like these bumbling, like self-righteous idiots. In the Quiet American, that is. But then you watch like Apocalypse Now or something like that, and they're these stone cold killers.
Right,
They don't have any delusions about they're not spreading democracy. They're just killing for like
right.
no reason. Um,
It's the difference between, I guess, theory and praxis.
yeah.
If you want to get down and dirty about it, the the idealists in Washington and the State Department and the CIA who are out here making the world safe for democracy, quote unquote, are using this massive tool of American armaments and soldiers who who have no illusions about what they're doing. They are there. Most of them, I mean, I think the draftee question is super overplayed. Most people who were in Vietnam were volunteers. I think there were actually more draftees in Korea, um, if I'm correct, which I believe I am. Again, feel free to let me know in the comments if I'm not. But yeah, most of them, they're there for their year and then they can leave. They will do whatever they have to go home afterwards, and they're there to do the job and get out. There's no certainly none of them care if the children get to go to school or get to become good capitalists and patriots. They just want to, if they have to burn down every village in Vietnam to go home, they will. Uh, there's a what's the book that I read? It was. Have you read Fields of Fire by James Webb?
No, I haven't.
That's a good book on the Vietnam War. I think there's a part in that where there's like a CIA guy talking about rice, like this new kind of rice that they're developing, and that's gonna triple the yield, and then everybody's gonna be fat and happy, and they're gonna want to side with the Americans. It's really out there stuff, but that kind of thing actually happened. Uh, and Alden Pyle is the ultimate sort of representation of that. Uh, in a written in a time where America really could do no wrong. This was written during Eisenhower's administration. We're talking about brinksmanship. We're talking about the need to stand up to communism. The sort of everybody was bought in on the domino theory, right? Korea had just ended, and everybody wanted to try and quickly forget about that. Um, yeah, it really ballsy stance by Greene to write this way, but it was true. It was just as true then and as it's true now. If we look at the Afghanistan war, the Iraq war, bunch of Alden Piles made that happen.
Oh, I can't even imagine the types they have running around in the third world nowadays, but I'm sure a lot of them don't look like Pyle anymore.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, we can we could wax on about that and some
yeah,
competency crisis type things,
yeah.
but
But really, Pyle is such a great character to kind of like carry that torch, if you will. The funny thing is, you said he has a dark side. He doesn't even know he has a dark side. Like,
right, yeah, he's so bumbling and so blissfully unaware that his ideas, in order for his ideas and ideals to be borne out, monstrous things have to happen. but he's ends justify the means kind of guy. Anything to spread freedom and democracy, and damn the consequences, because the ultimate consequence will be a freer, more patriotic, more Americanized version of Vietnam.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and he's tasked with like picking this third force. There's like a million of these private armies running around. It seemed like he picked the wrong one. Quite frankly, he picks General. I'm probably saying this wrong, but General Tay. General
Yep,
Tay.
yep. And that ends up, he actually gives Thay the book, gives Thay Harding's book,
Oh,
as if
that's right.
he's gonna read it. Like, and this guy, he's what can we say? Very very I don't know if Greene was aware of Diem, right? That was the
Mhm.
general, the general president of South Vietnam at the time of the Vietnam War, right?
Yeah.
Right. Um, total pragmatist, in it for his own self interest, right? Uh, very very similar to a modern day leader of a country, of a proxy war country that we are funding, um,
Hmm.
quite close to Poland, and that one really big country that we're not supposed to like. But I'll self censor for the algorithm. But I think you all know what I'm talking about. Uh, he'll believe anything you want as long as the money keeps running in, and this unfortunately leads to Pyle's demise. The start of the novel, Pyle is dead, and Vigo, who is the French detective, he's the military sort of policeman running things. He himself is a Catholic to Fowler's atheism, and he is in charge of trying to figure out who killed this quiet American.
Yeah, Vigo's an awesome character. I love him. Several of the other Frenchmen, but he's just so tired. He's like, look, look, Fowler, you just got like I have to ask you these questions.
Yep.
um,
And we're also, yeah, again, we're going to get into spoilers. It's very likely that Fowler had something to do with the murder of Pyle. Whether it's, you know, General Tay and his men were definitely involved. Fowler, it's very heavily alluded to that he was as well, but nobody can kind of pin it on him. And
well,
Fowler's motivations for doing so, on the surface, seem very super practical. He's doing it because he wants his woman back, right?
yeah.
But really, we can say that he's doing it out of some sort of obligation to Vietnam.
Yeah, there's this whole theme surrounding Fowler. People keep telling him he has to like pick a side sooner or later. He's like, no, no, I'm just an
He's just an
unbiased
observer.
reporter.
Yep.
Yep. And he's like so neutral. And then yeah, he picks a side. And in the beginning, it's interesting because he's like, did I have something to do with Pyle's death? Like he's questioning it himself right after the death. But then as we go along, it becomes, yeah, spoiler alert, clearer and clearer that he set Pyle up.
And as several I guess manosphere guys would tell you, as soon as Pyle is gone, Fong goes back to Fowler as if nothing had happened. Uh, many such cases, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, I think so. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but she only goes with Kyle because, like, so her sister is kind of like basically her pimp and
Right.
trying to set her up with, like good prospects for marriage. And so that's like the only reason she goes to Pyle because her older sister tells her to.
Right. Yeah, we did describe earlier that Fowler's the only person that cares for Pyle. I don't know. I kind of read into it that Fong had fondness for him and cared for him a little bit, but I guess, yeah, in the context of the end and her her life. Yeah, I guess it's just more of a marriage of convenience.
Yeah, there were a couple
A warning
lines.
for you passport bros out there.
Yeah, I was that was a question I had throughout the novel. I think like towards the end, it kind of becomes clear like she's described as like this kind of innocent, almost childlike existence. Like she just goes to whoever shows her affection and
Mm.
protection and all that stuff. And the way I read it is that like she never really cared for Pyle, and I think Fowler says as much. Like she only thought that she only knew that he had like money and a good family back home and wanted to see America
Yeah, but
and all that stuff.
and the really interesting thing about that is, of course, Fowler has to tell himself that because he can't compete with that in Pyle, but he also refuses to see that as his own sorry situation. It's like, oh, she doesn't love him. She just wants to marry him because he has a good family. If I were divorced, she'd marry me in a heartbeat, and it's not because I'm a British aristocrat type and I have a lot of money back home in England. No, it's because she loves me.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that at the end of the day, Fowler gets involved precisely because of his affection for this woman who is probably using him as much as she's using Pyle.
Yeah, and she's pretty emblematic of how Vietnamese are portrayed in this book. Is just very opportunistic. Like
Mm.
they just go where the money goes, and even where the money goes, like they won't even fire a shot if they feel like it won't be in their best interests. Like they're pretty cowardly in some of those battle scenes. Um, but yeah, no, it's so obviously you have Pyle standing for Americans. Vigo and Fowler are the old European colonial empires, but Thuong is pretty interesting. I thought as like the stand-in for kind of the colonized Southeast Asia.
Yeah, specifically the collaborators of colonialism, right?
Hmm.
You have the third force, General Tay, right, who is a collaborator, is an opportunistic collaborator, let's say, right?
Yes.
But you have Fong sort of representing almost a serf class, like almost we depend so much on colonialism, we wouldn't know what to do without it. Uh, and this is something I think that rings true in especially the Vietnam films of the United States, where you have uh, the American troops have very little regard for the people of Vietnam, and a begrudging respect and respect and animosity for the Viet Cong, for the NVA, for the North Vietnamese communists, who at least have an animating vision and principle for their nation and for the Vietnamese people, right?
Hmm.
Typically, what is it? The ARVN, the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, right? They're almost always portrayed as either collaborators with the North or just completely incompetent cowards, right? Very, very, very few times are they portrayed well. Even though there were some ARVN units and some Vietnamese units that actually fared quite well in the war. We can kind of map this on to the Afghanistan war as well, and Iraq as well. The American trained troops in both of those conflicts, terrible, disastrous attrition, uh, really difficult to get them to even show up, and half the time they just use American weapons to exploit their neighbors. Uh, to the point that in Afghanistan, people were welcoming the Taliban back, uh, putting up very little resistance, and you even just saw like these guys. They have billions of dollars worth of equipment. I could really just yell and cry and seethe and cope about the Afghan withdrawal for the next 2 hours, but I think I'd be preaching to the choir here.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, just unfortunate how much things really remain. I did want to ask you, I don't how much Mencius Moldbug, some Curtis Yarvin have you read?
uh, to be completely honest, absolutely none.
Totally fine. And I'm almost there with you. I've read maybe a little bit. The only reason I bring it up is because he often talks about, especially in his theory of the cathedral, is that the State Department is the engine of change in the United States, right? And for a long time, it was the Pentagon versus the CIA versus the State Department. I'm sure I'm getting some of that wrong, but again, feel free to correct me in the comments. Uh, Here we see it's strictly the CIA, and I'm wondering when that changed, because I would say that really the CIA had become an agent of the State Department's goals in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I wanted to get your take on that.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And actually, the funny thing about this book, and I don't know if this is true to Greene's actual experience in Vietnam, but he doesn't even know the initials. He thinks it's still the OSS.
Mm,
Um, and so, yeah, I know a lot of people kind of question who Pyle was based on. There's a suggestion that it was Edward Lansdale, he who convinced the Philippine communists they were like vampires. Um,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
but so he gets into the country like a year or two after this book is written. There's a couple other guys that it could be. So
Philby, I think, is one, right? But he ended up being an actual, um, like an actual communist
yes,
spy.
yes, um, yeah, sympathies with Greene there because he those two were both leftists and apparently got on quite well together. Um, so yeah, and what it seems like to me is that there were just a lot of like the CIA agents, much like Pilot, were just told, "Hey, go here and see what you can do." And and they, it seems, I'm not a historian really, so I don't have this down pat, but they have a lot more, I guess, power. I'm searching for the wrong word here, but they have a lot more
They have a longer
autonomy.
leash. Yeah,
Yes,
autonomy. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, like Pyle can just make allies with whoever he wants. There's General Fay, the Caudeus, who I'm sure we'll get into, and the Ho Hows, and that would never happen today or even like 30 years ago.
Yeah, no, there's the master bureaucracy that runs everything. There's a good book. Well, there's a few good histories of the CIA. The one that I've read most recently is The Devil's Chessboard.
Oh, I've heard of that. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
on my list
yep, I would
for
definitely
sure.
recommend it. It's a good one. And one of the things that the CIA prided itself, early on, was restoring the Shah to Iran, right?
Hmm.
And or was it yeah, it had to be restoring the Shah in the 50s. I think it was one of Teddy Roosevelt's sons actually did that. He was maybe Quentin Roosevelt, I think it was. Anyway, he was the lead CIA operative for that mission, and yeah, he had carte blanche to kind of do what he wanted, right? As long as the correct government was put in place, one friendly to the West, he could do that as he pleased. The Especially the late OSS, early CIA type missions were very much were very much informed by this desire for these idealistic Americans to just wreak havoc around the world, so long as it forwarded America's interests, as nebulous and sort of vague as that was.
Yeah, American interests, capital D, democracy, capital C, capitalism, what have you. Yeah, it really was. It does seem to me like just a bunch of either like theory cells like Pyle or like just your, um, I don't know, like total, uh, borderline like devils and like Lansdale and some of these other chaps that were doing their work, that came straight from the military.
Now, explain Lansdale to me real quick. I'd heard about the sort of vampire thing, but just that's an interesting thread, and I'd like you to expand upon it.
Yeah, so he was he was one of the first. People are going to yell at me for probably getting some of these facts wrong, but he was like the progenitor of, kind of the forerunner of like the CIA foreign interference. So they send him to like right after World War II or shortly thereafter. They send him to the Philippines because, of course, the U.S. and the government were pretty friendly at the time, and they needed help kicking the communists out of like the countryside and some of the more remote islands. So they send Lansdale down there, and he just goes full like psyop, like scorch earth psyops, like everything that's in the CIA playbook now. Like you can, excuse me, you can like trace back to him in some form or fashion. And then so he's so good at it, like the commies get crushed in the Philippines for a little bit, of course. And they're like, all right, cool. Now we have commies in Vietnam. Lansdale, go there. And yeah, he does. But I think he fails pretty badly because they weren't expecting to have to send the entire U.S. Army or military. But anyway, yeah, he's just kind of like one of the forerunners of like those those dirty, nasty, rotten CIA agents that we all think about.
Interesting. Yeah, definitely glad you brought him up because I know a lot about the CIA generally, but specific actors like that, except for of course guys like Alan Dulles or
Sure,
like I
sure.
mentioned Quentin Roosevelt,
Yeah.
these sort of foundational guys, and it sounds like Lansdale is one of those. Now, what was the vampire thing? There was in the
Yeah.
Philippines.
So he heard these rumors. Again, some history cell's gonna yell at me for this, but he like hears these rumors that there's this kind of folklore in the Philippines backcountry that there's vampires. So he makes vampires basically, or like fake vampires, and like puts like red, like it looks like red eyes, like in the dark at night in the woods, or something like that. He convinces the the people of the Philippines, the rural peons, basically, that these vampires are real, and they just get like scared shitless.
Interesting,
To
because
what end that stopped communism, I'm not entirely sure, but apparently it did.
apparently it worked. Yeah, because
Yeah.
I was thinking that's very similar to tactics used in Vietnam during the Phoenix program. And I
Oh,
wonder
you'll
if
have to elaborate a little bit on that for me.
the Phoenix program was like a MACV-SOG operation, which basically kill lists
Mm,
given out to try and root out guerrillas and enemy internal combatants in South Vietnam. The large terror campaign, some pretty good work done on it by Douglas Valentine, who writes a lot about how the CIA is like this awful, evil organization. He's an old school lefty, of course. So I would say take his opinions with a grain of salt in terms of because he does some of that. He does some moralizing about it. Uh,
yeah. Oh, well,
but
that's
I'm
interesting because that's pretty similar to other things that Lansdale did in the Philippines,
Yeah, no,
if I
that's why I
remember
was
correctly.
yeah,
So
that's why I was
I'm sure
thinking
his,
same playbook.
yeah,
As what
fingerprints are all over that.
yeah. Trying to think else, Mr. Lurker. Is there anything else about the Quiet American that we haven't gone over?
Um, I think Pyle, I kind of like Pyle. Okay, I know he gets all these people killed, but it's worth pointing out that he's kind of like a good person, like
Yeah,
on a,
he's a nice guy.
yeah, purely on like a just based on like the people he actually interacts with
Hmm.
day to day. Like he's a gentleman to Huang. Um, he's super nice to Fowler when he's stealing his chick. Um, you know, he's like just super apologetic and polite. And it's actually brought up, I don't know, someone can go into this further, but he has daddy issues. So
Hmm.
I just kind of imagine that he's like, oh, yeah, dad's pretty hard to please. That's why I picked up your carding. Um, and he uses there was a funny passage when he comes to, oh, you know that scene? Yeah. So he's already told Fowler that he loves Wong. And then they get back to Saigon. And then the three of them end up in Fowler's apartment. And he's wearing a Hawaiian shirt as
Mm.
for like no reason. And apparently it says like Fowler's like, oh, is he wearing like is he trying to be like a male peacock? Like is this plumage? So like all of his interactions are kind of like either sad or they turn pretty deadly.
He's a sensitive young man
Yeah,
at
but
heart.
they're all very funny. Like this
Yes.
people should understand this is a pretty funny book.
And despite, yes, despite the rough themes, despite the um heavier subject matter, Graham Greene is hilarious.
He really
He's
is.
he is he's one of the masters of that sort of dry English wit. Uh, one of his contemporaries was Evelyn Waugh, who was also a master of this. And yeah, for my money, they were two of the funniest English writers of the 20th century. Uh, prob- I would say the humor is more pronounced in a more silly book like Our Man in Havana,
Yes.
which is his other sort of spy book. This one is almost like a black comedy.
Yeah, no, it's unbelievably dark. Like there's so many scenes of death and destruction. Um, but like in the end, like almost every scene, like Fowler's just like ripping off like these pretty funny insults of the all the Americans he runs into. Like yeah, I don't know, it just has this weird sense of humor that I absolutely love.
Did you ever see that film, uh, Team America World Police?
I've seen bits and pieces of it.
Yeah. Well, at the beginning, you have these terrorists in France, and they're about to blow a bunch of stuff up. So Team America comes in and kills them, but of course they leave like a path of destruction. They destroy the Eiffel Tower and like all this other. It's like you're welcome as they leave like the burning charred rubble behind.
Yeah.
Uh, and it's funny because that's France, right? And France is known for its great monuments and terrific culture, and they're part of Western civilization, but you wouldn't get that sort of American attitude there without the adventurism that we did in places like Vietnam, where much of the same destruction was wrought. Um, yeah, not a great portrait of Americans. Also, I think it was done intentionally to call it the Quiet American as a sort of um, a contradiction in terms. Because of course Fowler's opinion of Americans, while already low, he never considers them quiet.
Yeah,
That
the
that's what makes
punchline is in like the first chapter when
yeah.
Hugo says, you know, like he says something to the effect, the only quiet American's a dead one.
Right, and then of course, Pyle's dead, and that's probably the most pernicious aspect of Pyle. Like you said, he's very likable. He's very people can identify with him, but he's just so dense that he can't see that he's really ruining people's lives. It's like it's like that one guy at your office, let's say, who's super incompetent, but you can't help but like him because he's decent guy. But if if anybody were to fuck up making up a cup of coffee, it'd be him. Ideal.
Yeah.
And he keeps failing upward. I think that's an important part too, because there is no rhyme or reason why Alden Pyle should have the amount of power that he does, except probably family connections and also his work on Harding.
Yeah, like his dad's a world-renowned expert on underwater erosion of all things. So, and he comes from Harvard and all this and that. It's like, yeah, like who let this guy be in the CIA?
Who let this guy, do anything? He should be the manager of a button factory or something.
Yeah, and said he's importing plastic explosives into Vietnam.
For the expressed purpose of taking over the French government with one more friendly to Americans. Yeah, so that brings up an interesting point too. That we in a kind of historical aspect, America was helping the French with their insurgency problem, with their communist problem in the north, while at the same time undermining the French government. It's sort of a changing of the guard. Like, okay, you guys can. It's like whenever you ask the mafia for help, you're going to end up with your restaurant burned down
Yeah,
at the end of the day. And it's this. When you make a deal with Americans, it's a Faustian bargain that can only end in one way, and we see that Piles, the instrument of that, you know, just really interesting commentary from Greene. I don't even know how much of it he expected to be true, but wow, I keep going back to this book, and I just think, wow, he really nailed it, and I don't think we can go over that too many times.
no, and just like his detail is so good. Like you feel like you're in Saigon or the Vietnamese like countryside, rice fields, or whatever. Like when you're reading this, you're like, it's so vivid. Um,
And it's a
so
very
I mean,
short book too. It's a
yeah,
quick read, maybe 150 200 pages. Uh, really breezes by, and he has a very good economy of language.
100%. And the other works that I've read by him are very much the same. He's just, yeah, very gifted writer.
Yeah, I don't think he has very I don't think he has a any long books. They're all pretty short.
Yeah,
Um,
like 200 pages at the most.
so, Mr. Lurker, um, where can people find you, and how can they get more Mr. Lurker?
Really, like just on Twitter. The only thing I'm really good for is I'm literally just a reply guy on Twitter. Um, I don't even know. I think, oh God, yeah, actually, no, I do know what my account name is. It's a Sea People Stan of all things, which I came up with when I was 18. So that's a little embarrassing, but that's literally it. I'm just on Twitter. Um, Literally nothing else.
All right. Well, make sure to give him a follow and be the reply guy's reply guy, and maybe he'll be able to put some more work out there.
Yeah, there you go.
As far as for us at the Double Dealer, you know where to find us at DBL Dealer, doubledealer.substack.com. Become a paid subscriber to get your own episode of Canon Fodder, to help support writers and artists. To if you really enjoy our stuff, make sure to like and subscribe and rate us on all the appropriate podcast platforms, YouTube, and I think that'll be it. Unless Mr. Lurker, you have any final thoughts?
Uh, One final thought. The second movie adaptation of The Quiet American was they started test screening on September 10th,
Yep, I've heard about
2001.
that. And people apparently really liked it, and
Yeah.
then didn't.
So I
That's
just thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah, that's Michael Caine and Brendan Fraser. Pretty good movie, actually. I would highly recommend people go watch it, if only
Yes.
if only to complete their Brendan Fraser or Michael Caine catalogs. Yeah, good point. Didn't think about that, but yeah, good film. I don't know how to end podcasts, so we'll just say insert ending here.